Calm is not something you lost. Let me say that again. Calm is not something you lost. It is buried underneath the meetings that ran long and the messages that never stopped arriving. Underneath the version of you who learned, somewhere along the way, that being tired was the same thing as being responsible. Before anyone taught you to hustle, before anyone told you that stillness was a luxury for people who hadn't yet made it, you already knew how to be quiet inside your own mind. You knew it the way a child knows it, without needing to be told. You could sit in a room and simply exist there, without your thoughts pulling you 6 places at once. That person is not gone. That person is not a memory you are mourning. That person is waiting, patiently, the way still water waits beneath a surface someone else keeps disturbing. This is not a productivity system. This is not a list of 5 tips to feel less stressed by Friday. What you are about to move through is a structured return, 30 days, reframed here into the architecture of a single listening, designed to walk you back through the layers that were built on top of who you actually are. Some of what you hear tonight will feel less like new information and more like remembering. That is intentional. You are not being taught calm, you are being reminded of it. Jim Rohn once said that we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. But there is a quieter version of that idea, one he circled often in his talks, that we also become an average of the environments we allow into our minds day after day without noticing. Nobody sits you down and asks permission to install urgency into your nervous system. It happens by accumulation, a notification here, a comparison there, a decade of small emergencies that were never actually emergencies at all. Here is what research in behavioral psychology consistently suggests. Chronic low-grade stress, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, constant kind, can measurably narrow a person's attention and dull their access to their own preferences, making it harder to know what they even want anymore, let alone feel calm about it. That narrowing isn't a character flaw, it's an adaptation. Your mind did what minds do under pressure. It optimized for survival, not for stillness. Which means the calm you're chasing was never a personality trait you lack. It's a state your system knows how to return to, once the pressure is named and slowly, deliberately removed. Over the next hour, we are going to walk through a single reset, not a hack, not a shortcut, but a rebuilding. You will meet a framework by the name of the 4 returns, something you can carry with you long after this recording ends, a way of checking in with yourself in 30 seconds instead of 30 days, once you understand its shape. You will hear it once, fully explained. You will hear it again near the end, so it settles somewhere deeper than memory. You were calm once, not as a child only, and not as a fantasy of who you could have been under different circumstances. You were calm as a fully formed person. In ordinary moments you probably don't even remember. Waiting for water to boil, walking somewhere with nowhere urgent to be, sitting in silence beside someone you trusted without needing to fill the space. Those moments were real. They are proof, and proof cannot be undone, only forgotten. Think of this recording less as a lecture and more as a slow unclenching, the kind that happens in a body after it finally realizes, somewhere past the point of exhaustion, that the thing it was bracing against isn't actually in the room anymore. You will not be asked to overhaul your life tonight. You will not be handed a 5-step morning routine or a productivity app disguised as peace. What you will be given is smaller and, strangely, More durable than that, a way of recognizing the exact moment tension enters and a short, repeatable path back out of it, one you can use standing in a grocery store line as easily as you can use it lying awake at 3 a.m. Earl Nightingale once described success as the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And it's worth asking, honestly, whether calm has ever been allowed onto your own list of worthy ideals, or whether it quietly got demoted years ago in favor of things that looked more impressive on paper. There is no shame in that demotion. Almost everyone listening tonight made the same trade, usually without noticing they were making it. What matters now is not the trade itself, but the fact that trades, unlike some things in life, can be renegotiated. Consider for a moment the actual mechanics of how a nervous system decides what deserves its attention. It is not a philosopher weighing importance. It is a pattern matcher, scanning constantly for anything that resembles the last thing that hurt it, embarrassed it, or cost it something. Across enough years, in an environment thick with notifications, deadlines, comparisons, and low-grade social threat, that pattern matcher becomes extremely efficient at finding reasons to stay alert and correspondingly bad at recognizing when it's safe to stand down. This is not a personal failing. It is closer to what happens to a smoke detector in a house where something is always slightly burning. Eventually, it stops distinguishing between real fire and burnt toast, because distinguishing has stopped being worth the risk of getting it wrong. Tonight is in part an attempt to recalibrate that detector, not to disable it. You still need it out in the actual world, but to teach it, slowly, through repeated small proof, that not every room it enters is on fire. Jim Rohn spoke often about the idea that we cannot change our circumstances, our seasons, or the weather, but we absolutely can change ourselves. And the nervous system, contrary to how permanent it feels in a bad moment, is one of the most changeable parts of a person, precisely because it was built by repetition and can therefore be rebuilt by it. That is not a promise that tonight will fix everything. It is a promise that tonight is a legitimate, evidence-based place to start. There is one more thing worth clarifying before we begin, because it changes how you listen to everything that follows. This is not a story about a dramatic before and after, the kind where someone hits rock bottom on a Tuesday and wakes up transformed by Friday. Real returns to calm rarely look like that, and if this recording promised you that shape of change, it would be lying to you in the same way the hustle bro content this channel deliberately avoids tends to lie, trading honesty for a more exciting narrative arc. What actually happens is smaller and, over time, far more reliable. A Tuesday, where you notice the tightness in your jaw 2 minutes earlier than you would have a month ago. A Thursday, where you catch yourself mid-reaction and choose differently just once. A quiet accumulation of small recognitions that don't feel like anything special in the moment they happen, and that only reveal themselves as significant when you look back across weeks rather than hours. So, if you're listening for fireworks tonight, you may be disappointed. But if you're listening for something closer to what actually works, patient, unglamorous, repeatable, then you're exactly where you need to be. And the next several chapters are going to give you precisely that. Settle in, wherever you are, car, kitchen, bed, a walk you're taking specifically to make space for this. There's nowhere else this needs your attention right now except here. Chapter 1. The weight you called normal the kitchen light is still on at 11:40 at night. She is standing at the counter, phone in one hand, cold tea in the other, scrolling through a group chat that has nothing urgent in it, just noise, dressed up as connection. Her shoulders are somewhere near her ears. She hasn't noticed. This has been the shape of her evenings for so long that relaxed and this have quietly become the same word in her mind. That is what this chapter is about, not the big collapses, not the breakdowns people write about after they happen. This is about the slow, invisible redefinition of normal. Somewhere in the last several years, for most people listening to this, the baseline shifted. Tension became the resting state. Stillness became the exception, something you'd schedule for a vacation you keep postponing. Earl Nightingale spent much of his career making one point in different forms that we become what we think about most of the time. What almost nobody says out loud is the darker mirror of that idea that we also become what we tolerate most of the time. If your nervous system spends 16 hours a day bracing, it will start to treat bracing as home. Picture a man on a commuter train, laptop bag on his knees, jaw tight, replaying a conversation from 3 hours earlier that already ended. Nobody is making him do this. There is no deadline attached to it in this exact moment. But his body doesn't know that it has been trained, meal by meal, meeting by meeting, to treat rumination as productivity. He would tell you if you asked that he's just a stressed person. He is not. He is a person who was calm once and who has spent years mistaking vigilance for identity. Rhetorical honesty matters here, so ask yourself plainly, when was the last time you were fully, physically still, not asleep, not distracted, just still for longer than 5 minutes? If the answer surprises you, you are not alone, and you are not broken. You have simply adapted to a version of normal that was never actually normal for a human nervous system to sustain. Research on chronic stress adaptation suggests something important here. The body doesn't require a crisis to stay activated. It only requires the absence of a clear, repeated signal that the crisis has passed. Without that signal, the system defaults to readiness. Always readiness. Never rest. This is not weakness. This is biology doing exactly what it was designed to do, in an environment it was never designed for. It is worth sitting with how strange this actually is. Once you see it clearly, a body built over hundreds of thousands of years to handle occasional acute danger, a predator, a fall, a fight, is now being asked to metabolize a completely different kind of threat. One that never fully resolves, delivered in a steady drip through a screen dozens of times a day. No wonder the system struggles to find the all-clear signal. It was never handed one. It has simply been left running, waiting for a resolution that the modern environment by its very design rarely provides. There's a second scene worth sitting with. A father standing in his driveway at 7 a.m., coffee in hand, watching his daughter get on the school bus, and even here, in a moment built for nothing but presence, his mind is 3 tabs deep into tomorrow's problems. She waves at him through the window. He waves back a half-second late because part of him was somewhere else. He will not remember this moment. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because he wasn't fully inside it when it happened. This is the quiet cost of calling tension normal. Not dramatic loss, just erosion. Moments that should have landed, sliding past instead. Because the mind was busy elsewhere, guarding against threats that mostly exist in anticipation rather than in the room. You did not choose this weight consciously. Nobody sits down at 18 and decides, I will now treat chronic tension as my baseline personality. It accumulates the way debt accumulates, a little at a time, easy to justify in each individual moment, devastating only once you add it all together and see the total. Naming it is the first act of returning, not fixing it yet, just naming it the way you'd name a weight before you decide how to put it down. Consider one more scene, smaller than the others but no less telling. A college student, 19 years old, sits in a lecture hall with her laptop open, technically taking notes, but really running 3 tabs of comparison in the background of her mind: someone else's internship, someone else's relationship, someone else's highlight reel. She has never known a version of herself without this hum underneath everything. For her generation especially, normal was never calm to begin with. It was born already tilted toward comparison, already wired for a kind of low-grade urgency that older generations only acquired gradually over years of accumulating responsibility. Research on constant digital comparison suggests it can quietly erode a person's baseline sense of enough, replacing it with a moving target that recedes every time it's approached. This matters here because the weight this chapter describes isn't limited to the overworked or the burned out. It reaches back further than that, into people who never got a calm baseline to lose in the first place, only a borrowed one, assembled from other people's curated lives. For them, this return is not backward-looking nostalgia. It's something closer to first contact, meeting a version of stillness they've heard about but never quite occupied. Either way, the invitation is the same. Whether your calm is a memory or a rumor, it becomes reachable the moment you stop treating its absence as permanent. There's a particular kind of exhaustion worth distinguishing here, because most people lump every form of tiredness together and call the whole pile burnout. There is the tiredness of genuine hard work, the kind that follows a long, meaningful effort and resolves cleanly with rest. And there is a second kind, quieter and far more corrosive, that has nothing to do with effort at all. The tiredness of a mind that never fully powers down, even during rest, even during sleep, even during the vacation that was supposed to fix everything. This second kind doesn't respond to more sleep, because sleep was never the missing ingredient. What's missing is the signal, the felt, embodied sense that it is actually safe to stop scanning. There's a reason this distinction gets missed so often. Our culture has largely equated rest with the absence of activity, when in fact rest is better defined as the presence of safety, which is a completely different thing, and doesn't automatically arrive just because the activity stops. A person can be lying perfectly still, doing absolutely nothing, and still be deeply unrested. Because stillness of the body and stillness of the nervous system are not the same event, even though we've been taught to treat them as interchangeable. Picture a woman on a beach chair, technically on holiday, laptop closed, phone in the hotel room, and still, underneath the sunscreen and the ocean sound, some part of her is running a background process, checking for problems that aren't there. She will come home from this trip and describe herself as still tired, and she will be telling the truth, because rest was never the same thing as safety, and she got the first without ever fully receiving the second. This distinction matters because it changes what you're actually looking for over these 30 days. You are not hunting for more hours of sleep or more vacation days. You are hunting for that specific felt signal of safety, the one that lets the scanning stop, even briefly, even while the rest of your life continues exactly as it was. This reframes what success even means over these 30 days. Success is not a life with fewer responsibilities for most people. The responsibilities aren't going anywhere. Success is a nervous system that can hold those same responsibilities without treating every one of them as a low-level emergency. That distinction is the difference between a person who is technically resting but still internally braced, and a person who is still working just as hard but from a settled place rather than a threatened one. The second version of that person is not doing less. They are simply doing it from somewhere calmer. And that shift, small as it sounds, changes almost everything about how the work actually feels while it's happening. Think of two people finishing the exact same demanding day, the same number of meetings, the same list of problems solved, the same hours logged. One walks out of that day wired and hollow, replaying conversations she can't let go of. The other walks out tired in a cleaner way, satisfied rather than depleted, able to switch fully into her evening because the day, however full, never actually threatened her. Same input. Radically different output. The difference was never the workload. It was whether the nervous system carrying that workload was operating from threat or from safety the entire time it was happening. Chapter 2. The voice before the noise. Where did the voice go? The one that used to know almost instantly what felt right and what didn't, before you learned to second-guess it into silence. That is the question this chapter sits inside. Not how do I become calmer, which treats calm like a skill to be acquired from scratch, but where did the version of me who already had this go, which treats calm as something to be recovered, like a language you spoke fluently as a child and simply stopped practicing. Carol Dweck's research on mindset draws a sharp line between people who believe their traits are fixed and people who believe their traits are capable of development. What gets missed in the popularized version of her work is this: the growth mindset isn't only about learning new abilities. It also applies to reclaiming abilities you already had and lost through disuse. You were not born anxious. You were not born reactive. Somewhere, a calmer operating system existed, and it can be rebuilt the same way any capacity is rebuilt, through repetition, not through willpower alone. Consider a young woman in her first real job, 8 months in, sitting in a bathroom stall on her lunch break, breathing shallow, replaying a Slack message she sent that morning that her manager hasn't responded to yet. 3 hours ago, she was fine. Now her whole afternoon is quietly organized around a message that probably means nothing. This is not who she was at 22, fresh out of school, unbothered by things outside her control. Somewhere between then and now, she absorbed the idea that vigilance equals competence, that the anxious version of her is the responsible version of her. That belief is worth examining directly, because it is one of the most common quiet lies inside high-achieving minds. That calm and capability are opposites. That if you relax, you will become careless. Studies in cognitive performance actually suggest the opposite pattern tends to hold, that sustained low-grade anxiety narrows working memory and reduces the very clarity that good decision-making requires. The calm mind isn't the careless mind, it is very often the sharper one. Here's a second scene. A retired teacher, 63 years old, sitting on her porch with a cup of tea. And for the first time in decades, nothing urgent is asking for her attention. And she feels unexpectedly uncomfortable, not peaceful. Uncomfortable, because the muscle of stillness atrophied so long ago that its return feels foreign, almost like guilt, as though she should be doing something instead of simply being somewhere. That discomfort is important to name, because if nobody names it, people mistake it for evidence that calm isn't for them. It is not evidence of that. It is evidence that the muscle has been unused, and unused muscles feel strange the first several times you engage them again. This is not proof you are incapable of stillness. It is proof of exactly how long you've been away from it. The voice before the noise, the one that knew what it wanted without needing to argue itself into it, the one that could sit in silence without treating silence as a threat, that voice did not die. Voices like that don't die. They go quiet, and quiet things can be spoken to again. Ask yourself, gently, not as an interrogation but as an invitation, what did you used to do without effort? That now takes effort? The answer to that question is usually a map pointing directly back toward the calm you're trying to return to. There's one more voice worth mentioning here, because it tends to arrive right when the others go quiet, the voice that insists your circumstances are the reason calm isn't possible for you specifically. Maybe other people can slow down, but not with my job, not with my family, not right now. This voice is persuasive precisely because it's rarely entirely wrong. Your circumstances are real, your constraints are real. But notice the sleight of hand inside that argument. It treats calm as a destination that requires perfect conditions, rather than a practice that can begin inside imperfect ones. Dweck's research on mindset applies here too. A fixed mindset toward your own circumstances says, this is just how my life is, while a growth mindset asks, what is the smallest version of calm available to me inside this exact life, today, as it actually is? Nobody is asking you to quit your job or restructure your family to access stillness. The voice before the noise was never waiting for ideal conditions. It spoke clearly in ordinary, cluttered, imperfect rooms, and it can again. It's worth spending a moment on how that voice actually sounds, because most people, when asked to describe it, reach first for silence, as if the voice before the noise is simply the absence of thought. It isn't. Picture a man standing at a kitchen counter, chopping vegetables for dinner, no podcast playing, no phone nearby, and his mind is not blank. It is simply single-threaded, one thought at a time, arriving and leaving without needing to be resolved, argued with, or acted on. This is the actual texture of that earlier voice, not emptiness, but sequence. One thing, then the next thing, without the layered, overlapping static of 6 unfinished threads running simultaneously. The noise that buried this voice wasn't loud in any single moment, it was cumulative. The way sediment builds a riverbed one grain at a time until the water that once ran clear now runs the color of everything it's picked up along the way. Recovering the voice, then, is less about achieving a dramatic silence and more about slowly reducing the thread count, closing one loop at a time, finishing one small unresolved thing at a time, until single-threaded thought becomes possible again, even for a few minutes, even while chopping vegetables for an ordinary Tuesday dinner that nobody will remember, and that you, for once, are actually present for. One practical note belongs here, because abstractions about single-threaded thought are easy to nod along to and hard to actually apply without a concrete starting point. The next time you notice several threads running at once, the work problem, the family text you haven't answered, the vague dread about tomorrow, all layered on top of each other, try naming them out loud. Or even just silently, one at a time, in a short list, work problem, unanswered text. Tomorrow, Naming does something specific here that simply feeling the static doesn't. It converts a vague, overwhelming hum into a short, finite list. And finite lists are far less threatening to a nervous system than infinite, undefined pressure. You don't have to solve any of the 3 items on the list right now. You only have to see them clearly enough to know that there are 3, not 30, and that all 3 can wait for their own separate moment rather than all be handled badly at once. This is, in miniature, exactly what the voice before the noise used to do automatically, before it went quiet. It never actually held every problem at once. It simply moved through them, unhurried, one at a time, trusting correctly that most things can wait slightly longer than panic insists they can. Chapter 3. The 4 returns nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Marie Curie once said, and stillness, more than almost anything else, is something people fear, largely because they've stopped understanding what it actually requires. So let's understand it, in a shape simple enough to carry with you. There are 4 movements inside every genuine return to calm. Together they form a framework worth naming clearly, because a nameless idea is easy to forget, and a named one is easy to reach for at 2, and when your mind won't stop. This framework is called the 4 returns: return to breath, return to space, return to self, and return to ground. The first return is breath. Not meditation in the formal sense, just the honest acknowledgement that most people spend their days breathing from the top third of their lungs, shallow and fast, without ever noticing. Research on the autonomic nervous system suggests that extending the exhale relative to the inhale is one of the most immediate, reliable signals the body has for shifting out of a threat state. It costs nothing. It requires no equipment. It is simply the first door back in. Picture a surgeon, gloved hands steady, standing outside an operating room 30 seconds before a difficult procedure. She does not think her way into calm. She breathes her way into it 4 counts in, 6 counts out, 3 times, before she pushes through the doors. This is not mysticism. This is physiology, used deliberately. The second return is space. Not physical space necessarily, though that helps, but psychological space, the gap between a trigger and your response to it. James Clear has written extensively about how identity shapes behavior more than willpower does, and one of the quietest applications of that idea is this: the version of you who reacts instantly, without space, is operating from an old identity, the one built under pressure. The version of you who can pause even for 3 seconds before responding is already practicing the identity of someone calm. Picture a man receiving a critical email from his business partner. Old pattern. Reply within 90 seconds. Defensive, sharp, new pattern. Close the laptop, walk to the kitchen, pour water, come back. Same email. Different self meeting it. The third return is self. This is the return to your own preferences, your own pace, your own definition of enough separate from whatever pace the world around you is moving at. Jim Rohn often spoke about the danger of living someone else's blueprint for your life without ever checking whether it matched your own. Chronic busyness frequently isn't chosen. It's inherited, absorbed from environments that reward exhaustion as though exhaustion were proof of worth. The fourth return is ground. The physical, sensory, present moment return, feeling your feet on the floor, the temperature of the room, the weight of your own body in the chair you're sitting in. Trauma-informed research on nervous system regulation consistently points to grounding techniques as one of the fastest ways to interrupt spiraling thought, precisely because thoughts live in the past and future, while the body only ever lives in now. 4 returns. Breath, space, self, ground, not a rulebook. A compass. You will not use all 4 every time. Some days breath alone will be enough. Other days you will need to move through all 4 slowly, like retracing steps home in the dark. Say it once more, so it settles. Return to breath. Return to space. Return to self. Return to ground. It's worth asking why these 4, specifically, and not some longer list of 10 or 12 techniques the way so many self-help frameworks tend to sprawl. The answer is deliberate. Each of the 4 returns targets a different layer of the same stress response. Breath works on the body's chemistry. Space works on the gap between stimulus and reaction. Self works on the direction of your attention over weeks and months rather than seconds. And ground works on the immediate present moment when thought has outrun the body entirely. Together they cover the full range, from the physiological to the philosophical, without requiring you to memorize anything more complicated than 4 words. Picture a nurse near the end of a double shift, standing in a supply closet for 90 seconds because it's the only privacy available to her. She doesn't have time for a guided meditation. She has time for 1 return, usually breath, sometimes ground, and that 1 return is enough to let her walk back onto the floor as herself again, rather than as the frayed version exhaustion was starting to produce. This is the entire point of naming the framework this small, so it fits inside a life that was never going to clear its schedule for you. It's also worth addressing directly why a framework like this works better as a physical habit than as an idea you simply agree with intellectually. Agreement happens in the part of the mind that reads and reasons. Calm happens somewhere lower and slower than that, in the nervous system, in the body, in patterns that were laid down over years and that don't update just because a better argument arrived. This is why so many people can nod along to good advice about slowing down and still find themselves 20 minutes later right back in the same tight-chested urgency. Not because the advice was wrong, but because agreement alone was never going to be enough to override a pattern that deep. The 4 returns work specifically because they bypass the argument entirely. You don't have to convince your nervous system that it's safe to be calm. You simply give it the physical signal, over and over, until it starts responding to the signal directly, the way a dog eventually responds to a sound rather than needing the reasoning behind it explained. Give yourself permission then to skip the debate with your own mind about whether you deserve to feel calm right now, whether your circumstances justify it, whether you've earned the pause. Skip straight to the return itself. The body will believe the breath before the mind believes the argument. And that order, body first, mind following, turns out to be the far more reliable one. A short note on how to actually practice this over the coming days, since a framework is only useful once it's applied. You don't need to schedule a formal session for the 4 returns. Instead, attach them to moments that already exist in your day. The walk from the car to the front door becomes a natural home for a return to breath. The 3 seconds after opening a stressful email before typing a reply becomes a natural home for a return to space. The first 10 minutes after waking, before the phone comes out, becomes a natural home for a return to self, simply by asking what you actually want from the day rather than immediately absorbing what everyone else wants from you. And any moment your thoughts have clearly run ahead of your body, mid-meeting, mid-argument, mid-worry, becomes a natural home for a return to ground. Attach the practice to what already exists, rather than trying to carve brand new time out of a schedule that has none to spare, and the 4 returns stop being one more task and start becoming simply how you move through a day that was already happening anyway. Some listeners find it useful to write the 4 words somewhere they'll actually see: the lock screen of a phone, a sticky note on a monitor, the inside cover of a planner. Not as decoration, but as a genuine prompt. The way a pilot uses a checklist, not because they've forgotten how to fly, but because even trained instinct benefits from an external reminder when the pressure is highest and memory is least reliable. Chapter 4. The practice of undoing you. Do not need to add anything to become calm. Let that sit for a moment, because it runs against almost everything the last decade of self-improvement content has taught you. Most advice tells you to build new habits, new routines, new systems stacked on top of an already full life. This chapter argues the opposite. Calm is rarely found through addition. It is found through undoing the slow, deliberate removal of what was never actually necessary in the first place. James Clear's work on habit formation makes a distinction worth borrowing here. Habits are not just things we do, they are also things we stop doing. And stopping is its own discipline, arguably a harder one. Because there is no visible finish line to point to. Nobody congratulates you for the notification you didn't check. Nobody applauds the meeting you declined. But that invisible subtraction is exactly where calm tends to live. Think about a small business owner, phone buzzing every 4 minutes with messages that feel urgent but rarely are. He decides on a Tuesday to turn off non-essential notifications for 1 single hour. Not a productivity hack, an experiment in undoing. By the end of that hour, he notices something unfamiliar. His shoulders have dropped an inch. He hadn't realized they were raised. Research into attention and cognitive load suggests that the mere presence of a phone within reach, even switched off, even face down, measurably reduces available mental bandwidth, simply because part of the mind stays on standby for it. Undoing, in this case, isn't about willpower. It's about removing the object the willpower was constantly being spent on. Here is a second scene. A woman who has said yes to every invitation for years, terrified that saying no makes her ungrateful or unlikable. One Saturday she declines a gathering for the first time in longer than she can remember and spends the afternoon alone, doing nothing structured at all. The guilt arrives first, right on schedule. But underneath the guilt, quieter, is something she almost doesn't recognize: relief. Undoing often feels like guilt before it feels like freedom. That is not a sign you're doing it wrong. That is simply the sound of an old identity protesting its replacement. Rohn used to say that discipline weighs ounces while regret weighs tons, and the practice of undoing is a form of discipline that rarely gets named as such, because it looks, from the outside, like doing less. It is not doing less. It is doing what actually matters, without the padding of everything that was only ever noise, dressed up as necessity. What is one thing, just one, that you have been carrying out of habit rather than out of genuine necessity? Not a dramatic life change. Something small, a commitment, a scroll, a conversation you keep having out of guilt rather than desire. Undoing begins there, in the smallest possible unit, because small removals compound the same way small additions do, quietly, and then all at once. There is a particular kind of resistance that shows up specifically around undoing, worth naming before it catches you off guard. It sounds like productivity, but it's actually fear wearing productivity's clothes, the worry that if you remove enough of the noise, you'll be left facing a silence with nothing in it, an emptiness rather than a peace. This fear deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed, because for some people, busyness has genuinely been functioning as a shield against feelings or questions they haven't been ready to sit with. If that's true for you, undoing slowly is not a failure of commitment, it's wisdom. Remove one thing, sit with what surfaces. Remove another only once the first has settled. Clear's research on habit change suggests that identity shifts most reliably happen through small, repeated proof rather than sudden overhaul, and undoing is no exception. You are not required to arrive at total stillness by next Tuesday. You are only required to prove to yourself once that removing one small unnecessary weight didn't collapse anything, and then to let that proof accumulate. There is also a social dimension to undoing that deserves honest acknowledgement, because not everyone around you will understand it, and some may quietly resist it. If your value inside a family or a friend group or a workplace has been built partly on being the reliable one, the always available one, the one who says yes before anyone finishes asking, undoing that pattern can feel, to the people around you, like a withdrawal of something they'd come to depend on. Picture a woman who has always organized her extended family's gatherings, the one everyone calls first, and who decides, for the first time, to let someone else handle the next one. The confusion she gets back isn't malicious, it's simply the sound of a system recalibrating to a version of her that takes up slightly less space in other people's convenience. That recalibration is uncomfortable for everyone involved briefly, and it is also necessary, because a calm you can only access by continuing to overfunction for everyone around you was never going to be a calm that lasted. Undoing, done honestly, sometimes ripples outward. That ripple is not a sign you've made a mistake. It's a sign the undoing was real enough to be noticed. If you're looking for a place to start tonight, before you even finish this recording, here is one honest suggestion. Pick a single obligation you've been carrying purely out of guilt rather than genuine desire, and simply don't renew it the next time it comes around. Don't announce it. Don't build a whole philosophy around it. Just let one thing quietly end, and notice, over the following week, what happens in the space it leaves behind. Most people expect that space to feel empty. Far more often it feels like room. The kind of room a house gains when a piece of furniture that never actually fit the space finally gets moved out, and you realize, walking past the spot where it used to be, that you can breathe slightly easier there now. Give yourself the full week to simply notice this, without rushing to remove a second thing, a third, a fourth. Undoing that outpaces your nervous system's ability to adjust, just becomes another form of pressure wearing a healthier costume. And that is exactly the trap this entire chapter has been trying to help you avoid. The goal was never an empty calendar or an empty inbox. The goal is a life that contains exactly what you'd choose if guilt and habit weren't casting a vote. Nothing more sparse than that, and nothing more crowded either. That version has been waiting the entire time, patiently, the way she always does. Not further down some road you haven't walked yet, but right here, one honest breath away, exactly where you left her. Over these next 30 days, you may forget most of what was said tonight in its exact wording, and that's fine. That was never really the point. What tends to stay long after the specific sentences fade is the shape of the thing. 4 small returns, a willingness to undo rather than only add, and the quiet permission to stop treating tension as your personality. If only one piece of tonight stays with you, let it be this, the simplest version of everything you've just heard. When the noise rises, breathe first, argue with it later. That single instinct, practiced patiently, is most of the reset right there. Everything else, the naming of the weight, the recovery of the voice, the undoing of what never needed carrying, all of it flows from that one small reordering, body before mind, breath before reaction, presence before performance. 30 days from tonight, you won't be a different person reading a different script. You'll be the same person, quieter, closer to the version that was always underneath, patiently outlasting every layer that ever got placed on top of her. Come back to this whenever the noise gets loud again. It will still be here. So will you.